Today, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Mike Graham. He is the former editor of the Scottish Daily Mirror, although he might have some choice words about that newspaper later. We'll wait and see. He's also now a presenter on talkRADIO, which is the largest growing radio station in the country and is taking on many of the mainstream broadcasters. He's also, in my opinion, one of the most outspoken and naturally gifted radio broadcasters of the era. He never stops talking, so I doubt that I will need to do much interviewing at all. We won't have many quiet periods here. So welcome to the airwaves, Mike Graham. How you doing?
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, well, that's a very nice intro you've given me there. Yeah, I mean, talkRADIO has been so exciting to be associated with over the last 2 years because we basically, people keep saying, oh, you know, look at LBC, they've got so many more listeners than you have. But we've doubled our audience 2 years in a row, right? If we do that again this year, we're going to be breathing down their neck, and I think they're going to be very worried about that.
Yeah, I first came across talkRADIO a couple of years ago when you just sort of launched and you were sort of south of the river still in Southwark, was it? I remember popping into a few segments there.
Around the back of Blackfriars Road, yeah.
Yeah, and it's grown so much since. So, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so keen to get Mike on today is because we've had a former Australian deputy PM, we've had Brexit Party MEPs, we've had Ian Duncan Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, lots of politicians, but we haven't had a media perspective. And Mike has a unique place as a former newspaper hack, old school, and now bringing the new media revolution to the internet and to the radio. And obviously this show is about Brexit. We're going to have to muscle it a little bit to try and keep it on Brexit, because I know there's so much to talk about. But we must start with the Dominic Cummings issue. It is burning away. Yeah. Now, could you tell me about the Dominic Cummings issues? And in particular, have the media done a really good expose here, investigation, or have they revealed something else about their campaigning? What do you make of the media and the Dominic Cummings thing? And does it relate to Brexit?
Well, I think it does absolutely relate to Brexit, because I think when you say we've got to try and keep Brexit in mind when we have this conversation, I don't think there's any other reason than Brexit for why Dominic Cummings is being singled out. Dominic Cummings is the enemy of the state as far as the Remainers are concerned. You know, he is the man who got Brexit done. He's the man who got the referendum won. He's the man who is the most dangerous enemy that the EU have ever seen because he's so good at what he does. And there's no question in my mind that when you watch the Three Stooges, as I call them, you know, Beth Rigby, Laura Kuenssberg, and Robert Peston, they're all Remainers, right? All these people want him out of Downing Street because for them that would be the beginning of the dismantling of Brexit. Because without Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, I think, is a far less formidable Prime Minister, and he won't be able to get what he wants to get, and he won't be able to know where to get to where he needs to go without Dominic Cummings. So I think there's no question that this has been targeted at Cummings to try and get rid of him. You know, let's face it, he's being accused of doing something which he hasn't done. Mm-hmm. The Attorney General says he didn't break the law. The police up in Durham are now investigating him because the first time they saw him up there, they realised that he hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, the world has gone completely stark, staring, bonkers mad, and I'm very pleased that Boris is keeping him on, and would appear that he's not going to let him go.
Okay. And I mean, on one side, we've had some people calling that view conspiratorial. On the other side, the chairman of Brexit Watch, Ben Habib, has argued that with the deadline for extending the transition period now just weeks away, it's completely nakedly the next point of attack of Remainers as they try and stop Brexit. Is it conspiratorial? Is there anything in that? Or do you really, is this deadline
not sure that
past?
I mean, there's a whole load of possible conspiracy theories going around here. I mean, one of my favourite ones is that actually Cummings is controlling all of this, because let's face it, at the moment, nobody's talking about anything other than Dominic Cummings in the media. Yeah. You know, I'm not talking Dominic Cummings non-stop, but basically Sky, the BBC, ITN, all they're talking about is Dominic Cummings. How can we get this guy out? How can we ask this question? How can we ask that question? You know, and at the end of the day, Boris is not under any real pressure now because all the focus has been moved away from him. Basically, the idea that people want to now get out and about is exactly what the government wants them to do. So actually, you know, in the sense that that Dominic Cummings is not going to lose his job because he's done a deal with Boris, and you know, some months ago, you know, who's actually winning here? I think the government's winning, because the government will get more people now who want to go back to work, going back to work. More people going out and about, lifting the lockdown, getting the economy going, and moving on to get Brexit done properly.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen some really crazy things outside his house, and even his elderly parents' house has been mobbed by the media. Now, I mean, do you think that the way that the media have behaved now, and this is on the back of, I think Brexit showed a lot of people perceive the media as behaving in a partisan way of Brexit, and now there's this. Is this a continuation of the same trend with the media?
I believe it is. I think the media now, as what we see of them, are so out of touch with ordinary people. I mean, the idea that these three stooges are telling everyone how angry everyone is in Britain. Emily Maitlis goes on Newsnight and starts pontificating on as if it's a fact that Boris Johnson is a liar, as if it's a fact that Dominic Cummings broke the law, neither of which things are true, right? This is the BBC, which is supposed to be in some way balanced, which is supposed to be in some way neutral, right? But they don't know anybody. They don't know any ordinary people. I mean, Laura Kuenssberg hasn't seen an ordinary person probably for about 10 years. Robert Peston lives in this kind of, rarefied world where they're all paid massively big six-figure salaries, and they have houses in the country, and they go to the Cotswolds for the weekend and stuff. And, they don't know any ordinary people. We have ordinary people calling us every day at Talk Radio, and ordinary people want Cummings to stay. They want to get out of the European Union. And that's why the Tories won such a big majority. And this is why the media, I believe, since Brexit, have been so out of touch. They're still doing polls about things and getting them wrong. It's hard to believe, really.
The latest on the Maitlis thing, just before we went on air, was that the BBC has now deleted their tweets.
I heard that.
Monologue, but she is standing by it. She's sharing tweets describing herself rather modestly as her savage brilliance. So I just thought that was quite amusing. But let's talk about Talk Radio quickly, because one of the things that really interests me about Talk Radio, and it's in stark contrast to Emily Maitlis and the BBC, is that your presenters, you quite proudly wear your allegiances on your sleeve, right? You are a vocal Brexiteer, and you don't pretend to be anything but, and that is so different from the BBC. But you have different voices on over the day on Talk Radio. So impartiality sort of emerges out of lots of people giving their honest opinion rather than lots of people giving their fake impartiality.
Well, that's exactly right. It's the fake impartiality that's the problem. I mean, if Emily Maitlis wants to have a show that she calls the Emily Maitlis Show, which is a sort of Fox News style opinionated broadcast, that's fine. But then you tell everybody that's what it is. What you don't do is make out that Newsnight is some kind of serious news program which is going to take an impartial look at what's been going on today. And here's somebody from the Tory party, and here's somebody from the Labour Party, and let's have a little bit of a debate about what's going on. No, this is Emily Maitlis basically editorialising on public money, 300,000 quid's worth of public money, by the way. Once a year we pay her that. And she has a duty of care to be absolutely and utterly impartial, and it's in the BBC Charter. She can be as hotshot as she wants on Twitter, but at the end of the day, she's employed by the BBC. And if the BBC decide to remove an image or a video that they've put out, which includes her giving this information and giving these opinions, I'd say she's in a bit of trouble. I'd say that she probably should be suspended.
Okay. I mean, I can't see how she's going to argue that it's within the BBC's charter, but she's apparently attempting to. So to keep this on Brexit, as we say, I think the deadline coming up in a month's time really is one of the most significant. It's a no going back sort of one. If it isn't extended, we either leave without a deal or with one. And the next few weeks could get, for the Remainers, I think a lot of people have underrated how important they are. Can you expect more attacks of this or more sort of attempts to change the subject, to really do something? What are you expecting over the next couple of weeks?
Well, they are a very, very pernicious group of people, and they are also very well funded, as we know. There's all sorts of groups that are going around doing all manner of things that we probably don't even know about. I mean, I didn't even know about this organisation called Led by Donkeys until this week, when it turns out that they're the people driving the lorry with the great big TV screen, parking outside poor old Dominic Cummings' family home, and playing very, very loud videos about people who are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's quite disgraceful. Now, I don't know who's funding that. Somebody is.
I have to say, I've come across Led by Donkeys before. They purchased BrexitParty.com before the Brexit Party, and they also put up lots of billboards with sort of fake manifesto pledges. And I had thought they disappeared after losing the campaign to stop Brexit and losing the campaign to stop Boris. But they seem to re-emerge now onto another losing campaign. So they're a very interesting group there.
Yeah, but there you go. So that tells you all you need to know, that they are basically pro-Remain. They've been funded previously to go anti-Brexit, and now here they are trying to get rid of Dominic Cummings. All you've got to do is join the dots. You know, they're not that clever, these people. And then you've got people like Jolyon Moron, as I call him, you know, the world's thickest barrister, who's never won a case in his life, but basically goes around beating foxes to death in his backyard with a baseball bat. He's being funded to the tune of probably thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds by a bloke called Dale Vince. Now, Dale Vince is the bloke that owns Ecotricity. He's a well-known Remainer. He's also a well-known sort of climate change fanatic, right? He wants everybody to drive around on electric motorcycles because he's a millionaire and he can afford it. None of the rest of us can. But they're constantly I expect to see a load of lawsuits because this is what they try to do. You know, they tried to put Boris Johnson in prison. They tried to stop him from leaving the European Union by any means that they could. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see old Lady Hale and the Spider re-emerging at some point, somehow. But I think, luckily, because of the massive majority that Boris has got, he's got a lot more protection than he had before the election.
Yeah, 80 seats, even with the polling showing that the popularity is going down, gives him a lot of security for the next few years.
Yeah.
Just quickly, do you think, I mean, that funding there that you've talked about for Jolyon and his fox beating enterprise, do you think if that was a Brexiteer organisation, wouldn't that be called dark money? And equally, if it was led by donkeys, was going after Labour or Remainer people turning upside their houses, shouting abuse, do you not think that would be called, you know, really worrying, and the police would be involved? Is there a double standard here in public life with Brexiteers and the media in that way?
Oh, I think no doubt about it, because the trouble is, all of these very clever people, as they like to think they are, you know, most of them are either barristers or very highly well-paid lawyers. They're either working in the city or they're working in quite important media jobs. There's a whole kind of secondary establishment now, which is very left-wing in this country, which is, I don't know where it came from, but they're all sort of champagne socialists. So they all seem to have loads and loads of money. They seem to want to be part of the European Union. For what reason, I could never get out of them. Because every time I say to them, what's so great about the European Union? I mean, I said this to somebody the other week, by the time this pandemic is over, the European Union could be a completely busted flush. They have no money. They haven't got any money to give to anybody from, say, Italy or Spain or any other countries that have been ravaged by COVID-19. They've got no countries that are rich enough to give them any money. So I don't really see the point of the EU. And it may well be that by the time we're talking this time next year, the EU is completely and utterly a bankrupted organisation.
Yeah, I mean, the financial implications of this COVID crisis. I mean, the chairman of Brexit Watch has written a lot about it and how they are facing a serious problems. But we'll get onto that in a minute. I want to stay on the media quickly. Yeah. Because with, you know, the rise of talkRADIO, the rise of lots of, I mean, a more diverse media landscape online in particular, I think, and in the post-Brexit era, I think there's people who don't agree with the establishment, who want to break free of the EU, are having, I think they're having more of a voice now, and the time that the BBC will be around is limited now. And I think that you're playing a big part in that. And I spoke to Claire Fox this morning, and she was saying about how Brexit could cause a real revival in our democracy. Do you think that Brexit and the sort of pro-Brexit media or diverse media that you're leading could lead to a real revival in the democratic discussion in this country, like after Brexit, the things that you're doing?
Oh, definitely. I think one of the things that Brexit showed us, and the victory in the referendum, followed by 2.5, 3 years of absolute stalemate, followed by, you know, punctuated constantly by these so-called well-educated people telling everyone who voted for Brexit that they were stupid, that they were thick, that they didn't have any right to be British, and they shouldn't be proud to be British. And I think they were more shocked, really, at the fact that they had seemingly lost their power. And I think what we're seeing now with the whole Dominic Cummings episode is that these media figures can't quite believe how nobody trusts them anymore. They can't quite believe that all of their power seems to have been taken away from them and the rug has been taken off them. I mean, I was watching that press conference that Cummings was doing the other day in the garden behind Downing Street. And the look on the faces of the journalists was classic. It was brilliant. I actually put a picture out of the guy from Channel 4 saying, you know, Twitter, please show me a picture of somebody who's just had the rug pulled from under him, because they were just staring at Cummings. They couldn't quite believe that he was getting away with it, because they all went into that conversation thinking, we will nail this guy. We will walk out of this room, this garden, and he will have resigned because he will have had no other option. But they're not very good. They're not very clever. I mean, Pippa Crerar, right, who was running the Mirror's campaign against Cummings this past weekend, she puts out a tweet the other day saying, breaking news, Durham police to investigate, to establish the facts of what happened when Dominic Cummings went to Durham. And I tweeted her back and I said, in my day, we used to establish the facts of the story before we actually printed it. You know? Because that's not what they did. They got it, half of it, they got it wrong. They didn't know what was going on. They rushed to print because they thought they'd get it out there and he would immediately have to resign. And of course, it hasn't worked out that way. So the ordinary people of this country have realised that actually, if they turn out at the ballot box and they vote for what they want and they vote with their feet, they can actually change things.
Mm. I think that was the real unexpected force of Brexit. That, whether or not you agree or disagree with the virtues and vices of the EU, it was that sense of empowerment that people had after it. And I think particularly working class people, the sort of people that don't watch the BBC, felt like they suddenly had a voice and a power. And I think that's where it relates to sort of the media landscape and what you're doing on radio. Can you talk about the sort of audience that you have, and how, and maybe are they a group that you think needs more of a voice? Are they a group that you think was ignored before Brexit? And tell me about your listeners.
I think the thing that most of our listeners have in common, and they may not always agree with everything that we say, they may not always agree with all of our points of view, and there's plenty of people who listen. There's a famous saying in radio that comes from Howard Stern in America. And Howard Stern, of course, multimillionaire, made an absolute fortune being quite an outrageous broadcaster. The saying was that if you like Howard Stern, you listen for 20 minutes. If you hate him, you listen for half an hour. And so, the opposition to what I do personally are still listening because they want to know what I'm saying. They want to know what I'm up to. I think they see me as some kind of, touch point for a particular section of society. But what I say to people is that we are basically the home of common sense, because common sense in this country has been totally lost. When you look at some of the programming that goes out on the BBC, when you see the election night broadcast and the disappointment on the faces of people like Adam Bolton and on the faces of Hugh Edwards and all of these people who have become very wealthy. I gave an interview a while ago and I said the problem with the media in this country now is that it's very elitist itself. People used to go into newspapers because it was a trade. They might have been local kids who grew up in Bradford. They'd go and work for the Bradford Telegraph. They'd go and they might eventually end up in Fleet Street. But what they were not was this kind of cafe society of people who live in Islington and who only eat at very expensive restaurants and who only hang around with each other. They don't know anybody who's ordinary. All their kids go to private school, And so the ordinary people of this country, the man and woman who works for a living, the people who want to hear something on the radio which they can relate to, they relate to me because I'm an ordinary guy. I don't have highfalutin, houses. I drive a nice car, but that's about the only luxury I've got. My kids go to state school. I know what it's like to travel by train. I used to go to work every day on the tube before Sadiq Khan managed to screw that up by limiting the number of trains. And so I know what people go through. I know what people's problems are like. I've been broke. I have had no gilded education. I didn't go to Oxbridge. I'm not part of the elite of this country, and I never wanted to be, and I certainly don't want to be. So what they now do, the ordinary people in this country, is they tune into talk radio because they can basically relate to us. But if you're watching Emily Maitlis, who probably went to Oxford, I think, who talks in a very posh voice and who's rather well off, and who probably spends weekends in, somewhere near Oxford, I don't know. It's just, they look at her and they go, I don't know what you're about. I don't know what you're like. I would never really see you in a pub. I don't know you.
I think we understood. I have worked with the Brexit Party, in case the listeners didn't know. And when we were fielding interviews during the general election, I was much keener to get people on your show in the morning than I was to get people on Newsnight, because I knew that BBC Newsnight might have a huge budget, but they're only reaching sort of a sealed off bubble of very highly well-off people who I think their minds are going to change. Whereas talk radio is new, it's diverse, you get different voices on, and you're reaching the voters that I think we can change their mind. But anyway, just to keep carry on. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, we won't give you such a nice car. I mean, I used to be, when I worked in Scotland, I used to, they have this, one of the ludicrous things that the BBC does is in those days, I don't know if they still do it, they used to break out a Scottish section of Newsnight, which cost them an absolute fortune because they had to have a whole separate studio in Scotland, a whole separate presentation team, a whole separate, makeup team. People would have to be kept in the BBC studio. I used to live in a place called Linlithgow, similar to Alex Salmon, funnily enough. And they used to send me a taxi to Linlithgow to take me into Edinburgh and back out again. And they used to pay me to do what would be basically a 6 to 7 minute slot. And the taxi ended up costing more than the actual appearance fee. But the whole thing cost them about 200 quid, right, for 7 minutes. Now, I don't know why they do that. I mean, I was quite happy that they did it at the time, and I was quite happy to go on. But at the end of the day, commercial operations can't run that kind of thing. We can't give people taxis, which costs upwards of £60 to go from one town in Scotland to another, just so that you can come on for 5 minutes. They're totally profligate with our money. They don't care because nobody's ever asked them before what they do with it. Suddenly now they're being confronted with not only having to save money, but having to justify what it is that they do. And an awful lot of what they do on the BBC, quite frankly, is nonsensical. Somebody told me the other day, when they were doing the report on Cummings' trip up to Durham, they actually counted it in kilometres. And you're going, sorry, that's an EU measurement. We don't use kilometres in this country, thank you very much indeed. But all these little things slip into their broadcasts. They think nobody notices. Well, I bloody do.
Do you think that with the BBC budget and some of the, I mean, I noticed it during the general election that the BBC will quite often, they'll send, there'll be a BBC South East camera there. There'll be a BBC Newsnight camera there. And there'll also be a BBC News, the rolling news, the BBC News. There'll be 3 BBC cameras. And what struck me is they'd arrive, the crews, and I'd say, your BBC colleagues are over there. If you want to go set up with them. They had no idea. They had no idea that there were 2 other camera crews from the BBC. And it is, and the ITV and the Sky crews were always half the size. And the waste was just incredible. And I don't know, my view is that that's probably because they're not having to turn a profit. They get money for free, however terrible their product or service is. They're removed from the sort of daily grind that business owners understand. Do you think that that's part of it, and the reason that they can have these luxury broadcasts that are just on topics and views that are not reflected in the country?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, all you've got to do is listen to the Today programme on Radio 4 to get a pretty good idea of what it is that the people who present that show think about. And the people that present other shows on Radio 4 think about. They think everybody's sitting around reading Cicero, or, sitting around reading some Greek tragedy, or, I've just been to, some place in India to discover myself because I can afford to do that. If you're living in a council house with 3 kids working every single hour that God sends in order to keep the wolf from the door, I'm afraid that ain't going to do it for you in the morning. You're going to prefer to listen to Julie Hartley-Brewer and me. But at the end of the day, it is like the civil service, the BBC. Do you know they've got 61 separate local radio stations, right?
Amazing.
And that means they've got BBC Sussex, BBC Surrey, BBC Kent, just to name 3 right next to each other, completely separately run, completely separately programmed, completely separately staffed. Now, you can't tell me that in any modern sort of commercial world, that is in any way justifiable. What the hell do they think they're doing?
Yeah. And I do, when they announced the cuts to the radio stations the other day, I just, having worked at news sites myself, I just know that there's so many local journalists and people working for independent online news sites, cheering, saying, yes, they're not stealing our audience, but all we hear about is the woes of the BBC. It is quite amazing. But I just want to say how you are finding that as Talk Radio cuts through or build your audience, you are able, I think, it's really showing now, able to change the agenda, right? I mean, the one issue that I want to bring up is that of the migrant boats that have been coming across the channel. Now, my heart does go out to a lot of these families and people that are looking for a better life, and people will call us all sorts of names just for talking about it. But it's a huge issue, right? And it's something that worries people, and unless it is talked about honestly and frankly, people get more worried, and that's when I think we get dangerous views that come out. So I think it's great that I saw you finally. The only people that have been talking about this massive influx we've had in the last couple of days is you and Nigel. And between the 2 of you, you've managed to really get the mainstream just about talking about it when they were attempting to ignore it. I mean, Sky actually went out and finally filmed what was going on, but only after you and Nigel started talking about it. So do you think you're having a real effect now that you're challenging the mainstream narratives, you're getting views and points out there that they tried to ignore for so long?
I think that's right. And the bigger we get, the more that will happen. And I think we're at the very beginning of a very successful period for Talk Radio, because I really can see the audience growing. I mean, we are now, having got the news in Q1, which is January, February, March, that we had doubled our audience from the year before. We are now running, I would say, at about 3 times the rate that we were running in March, because, you know, people are coming to us now because they're starting to trust us, and they're starting to realise that there is an alternative to the BBC Remainer stations and the BBC Remainer presenters and the people who keep telling us all that we must be kind, unless, of course, you're a right-winger, in which case you can stand outside his house and start shouting at him every time he comes out. You know, it's a very, very two-faced society that we live in. And Nigel Farage has done a magnificent job, and I told him that on the air when we got him on. I mean, just to show you how ridiculous our opponents are, LBC. You know, he does a show with LBC, but they didn't put him on. We put him on, and we're supposed to be the rival station. And, you know, what he showed us is that, you know, the Home Office is lying. The Home Office is being very, very careful about what they put out there. And they're going to be on I'm going to be on their case now, as Nigel will be, for quite some time, until we get them to establish exactly what is going on. Because, as I said to him, it's rather ironic that the one group of people who are allowed onto the beaches at the moment are the people coming illegally from France. We can't go down there and drive onto the beach and sit there, but it's all very well for them to land on it and run up and come and stay in Britain.
Mm. I think we're going to start seeing this much more broadly after Brexit. People are going to feel empowered, and with a more diverse media landscape, you know, they can call it populism all they want, but certain issues and certain people just happen to be popular, and we're going to see real change in the media landscape. And I think it's exciting times. I think a lot of people like to naysay and say that Brexit is the beginning of a terrible time, but I think there's lots of positives, right? And that diversifying and that confidence that normal working people have been given, I think is a really big one. So I just want to bring it back to the Brexit negotiations, as they've been called, that are going on. We've seen a rather furious exchange of letters between David Frost and Michel Barnier, one of your favourite people. And the latest from the EU, this will make you laugh as well, is that Michel Barnier released a letter today saying that the EU will be happy with a 2-year extension. 2 years, they're happy with that. They're happy with that. Are they on this planet, Mike? What's going on there?
Well, no. I mean, there are clearly people that are in the EU who still think that we give a toss what they think. I don't care what they think. I don't want to be part of their little club anymore. We're not part of their little club anymore. We don't have to do what they say anymore. And if they don't like it, they can get stuffed, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, our position should clearly be, listen, here's what we want, and here's what we expect you to give us. And if you're not willing to give us that, cheerio, we'll see you around. It's as simple as that. You know, I don't think we should spend ages and ages talking to them about it. I don't think we should spend any time at all, you know, attempting to keep them happy. I couldn't give a monkeys what they want. They want our fish. They can't have them. I don't think we're going to give them to them. They would like us to have some kind of, you know, mutually beneficial trading agreement, which involves us also then having to take things from them that we don't want to take. I don't see why we should do any of it, to be honest. I mean, Boris doesn't have to fear the Parliament okaying anything. He's got a massive majority, even those 20 who apparently want Cummings to go, who are mostly Remainers anyway. Even if they vote against the government, he's still got 60. I mean, you know, there is nothing to fear if you're a Brexiteer right now, and I don't think we should be wasting any more time talking to these idiots.
Is there though? I mean that presupposes that we trust Boris. I mean the David Frost has been very strong in his words, in his letters, in the things that he's said publicly about the EU. But we trusted some of us were silly enough, me included, for a little while, to trust Theresa May when she started saying really strong things about the EU and getting Brexit done. I mean, do you really, when you really drill down, do you really trust Boris to face this off and bring it to an end?
I do, because I think he wants, like all prime ministers, he wants to have some legacy that he can leave behind. And what he doesn't want for his legacy is COVID-19. and 40,000 dead people on his hands. What he does want is to be named in the history books as the man that got Britain out of the European Union, because that's an important piece of history, if you like. And I think he's absolutely wedded to that. Also, I think the difference between him and Theresa May, well, there are many differences, but I mean, one, she had a very delicate and difficult situation. She was relying on the Unionists in Northern Ireland, to keep her coalition together, because she didn't have the numbers to make anything happen. And so she was constantly being messed around. And I think as a result of that, she got it very badly wrong, because she kept trying to appease everyone instead of sticking two fingers up to them and going, look, this is what we're doing. If you want to vote it down, but stop trying to kind of please everyone and give everybody a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Boris doesn't need to do any of that. He really doesn't. And all he has to do is talk to the people in his cabinet who are all pretty staunch leavers from what I can see, and basically get them all to come to the table, make sure there's no dissent, and if necessary, say to Europe, we're going without a deal. We don't need a deal. Forget about it.
Okay. I have to say that the cabinet does worry me a little bit,
Does it?
Yeah, we saw that one. Well, to be fair, he was who was he that resigned yesterday? I honestly never heard of him.
Oh, that guy, yeah, Douglas Ross, right?
Yeah,
Douglas
Ross,
cabinet,
sorry.
I'd never heard of the guy.
Yeah.
And suddenly he'd been in the job 4 months, decided he had to leave. And of course, once again, you had the Ramonas at Sky predicting that this was going to be the beginning of a massive revolt. And guess what? Nobody else resigned. So it wasn't the beginning of a revolt at all.
I heard them on the radio saying, oh, well, we'll watch this closely and see who else resigns. And I have to say, I was sat there thinking, really? He has whipped the people that are there so far pretty hard, and he has ensured that finally that there is a Brexiteer government largely. But I do, to bring it back to the cabinet, I guess, because we're going to be drawn back here and to Cummings' issue. Did you find the interview with Gove when he got wheeled out to basically say that he too would go for a drive to check his eyesight a little bit cringeworthy? Do you think he was struggling there a little bit?
Yes, I think he was. Well, you see, I think that this idea of the eyesight is interesting, because there's no question, it seems to me, that people who have had COVID say that it does affect your eyesight. And doctors have been quoted as saying the same thing. But when I heard Cummings' explanation about why he did that, I didn't think immediately. This is where I think people are getting bogged down in the kind of crazy detail of individuals' lives. I don't want to know what Dominic Cummings' inside leg measurement is, but apparently Robert Peston does. He seems to want to know everything about what he did at every moment of this particular trip. I know when Cummings said, look, I needed to get back to London. I wanted to drive there. I wasn't sure if I was going to be in good enough shape to do it. So I thought I'd go out for a sort of practice run. Now that kind of makes a bit of sense to me, because if you've been very ill and you know that you're maybe not up to doing the sort of things that you would normally do, you give yourself a bit of a breather, and you give yourself a bit of time. Anyway, there's all manner of questions about whether his wife should have driven. Could she drive? Yes, she apparently can. What's the deal with going into the woods with the boy who wants to go for a pee and seems to then take 45 minutes to come back out? But if you start to analyse everything that everybody does, you'd probably, find out that quite a lot of people do some quite weird things and some quite eccentric things, particularly if their health isn't particularly great.
Yeah. I mean, the whole affair, I think we've drilled down into it so deeply that odd things are going to come out, right? And I'm kind of with you that I kind of hope that we do stop talking about it at some point, hopefully, in the near future.
I mean, as I said, if Matt Hancock's treatment of Robert Peston is an indication from last night of exactly what the government is going to do, then I think we're in good order, because basically the Daily Mail overnight changed their minds on Cummings and didn't lead with it on the front page. Suddenly, when the Mail's not doing it, I think there's a pretty good chance that it's going away. And unless and until something else, some other revelation comes up, the thing that surprises me about this trip to Durham is that nobody's seen him and taken a picture. Nobody's taken a picture of the car, as far as we know. There doesn't seem to be any CCTV of any trip that he's taken. Now, normally speaking, we got the more CCTV cameras than any other country in the world per square mile. I'm amazed that nobody has got him on film.
That's a very good point, actually. You'd expect those newspapers to have found it by now, but instead they're asking those odd questions. But I mean, with the Durham issue, And you mentioned Matt Hancock's sort of
Mm.
slapdown the other day. Do you think that the government's attitude to the media under Dominic Cummings and Boris has changed? It seems to me like, you know, because of all the things we've already spoken about and how there's people who are going to YouTube and talkRADIO and things like that, the government itself now has woken up to the fact that they don't care what Peston says. Just like we were saying, we're starting to lose patience with them. Do you think Boris really means it? That he's starting just to go, oh, I don't care what you guys think anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of that going on, and I think one thing that Boris's government has been quite good at is their own digital strategy is actually quite good. You know, on Twitter they're pretty efficient. You know, they don't make the kind of mistakes that party politics used to make when they tried to embrace something like Twitter. Facebook they're pretty good at now as well. Instagram, you know, they seem to be better at making events rather than letting events make them, if you know what I mean. You know, where even during the election campaign, Boris would appear, he would do his thing, he would disappear. You know, he wasn't any longer just kind of standing there waiting to be pot-shotted at, if you like, by the following day's press, because basically they can control the agenda now, and I think that's what they've been quite good at doing. And in a funny sort of way, even though I'm not sure it's a great thing to keep going, the media briefing kind of keeps them all in a cage in a way, because what it stops is this kind of constant drip of people calling Downing Street and asking a question. You know, I presume, and I don't know this because I'm not in the lobby briefings, but I would imagine that basically if you ring Downing Street now with a question, they say, well, wait until, you know, this afternoon at 5 o'clock and you can ask it then.
I think that's a really interesting point. The Downing Street have clearly realised that they can go straight to the voter. It's something that Nigel realised quite a few years ago. And during the general election, you did notice the Tories, some of their communication strategy was utterly bizarre, I thought. And I thought it was unbecoming of a national crisis that they were just doing sort of silly stuff online. But it did actually work. It got people's attention.
Yeah.
And they were just putting their statements out as videos on Facebook, going straight to the voter, ignoring the journalists. But you mentioned the lobby there, and actually I'll come back to my questions in a minute, but we'll talk about that quickly, because I think the lobby is something really odd in this country, that we have essentially a cabal, a secret club of rubber-stamped establishment journalists that get to speak to the Prime Minister's spokesman every day, and then they get to go and spin what the spokesperson said however they wish. And I just think, do you think that the era of the lobby is time limited? In America, the whole thing is just broadcast live, so people can tune in and make what they want of it. They don't have to have a second-hand account of what was going on in the lobby from a journalist at the Mirror or the Guardian. And a journalist like yourself shouldn't have to sign up and be in the lobby. You should be able to play your listeners what's going on in the lobby straight away, and then you can talk about it openly. Do you think that the lobby is a weird thing, and it needs, or do you think there is a good reason why it's all behind closed doors and it means they can speak honestly? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to say that it has kind of outlived its usefulness in a way, because technologically speaking, you know, the lobby was born in a time when you gave a briefing to some journalists and they wrote about it in a paper that came out tomorrow. That doesn't happen anymore. You know, as soon as something is said, it's out there. You know, as soon as somebody tweets something, it's out there. I mean, Donald Trump has proven basically that he communicates directly with the people of America through his Twitter account. You know, he doesn't even have to have press conferences anymore. And when I do watch them, I do find them very amusing, not least because some of the American journalists are wearing masks while they're mumbling their way through whatever question they're giving him, and he's batting them away, you know, like a guy with a fly swatter. But yeah, I mean, I think the problem with getting rid, I suppose, of access to government ministers and or civil servants is that you might never get it back. And I would rather not give that up until such time as we're pretty sure that there's going to be something better in its place. And at the moment, I don't know what that would be. Okay,
fair enough. I hear that. That's quite a nuanced answer. There are certainly some advantages. I think there is some advantages for journalists being able to quiz them, but, you know, without necessarily going out straight away and really get down to the core answer and think through their pieces. Increasingly, the lobby it bugs me, because you hear a headline and I'm just like, is that really what they said? Do I believe them? You know? But anyway, we'll move on quickly. I want to talk, you're obviously formerly an editor of a major newspaper, and you know a thing or two about newspapers as well as new media online stuff. And what do you think's going on at the Daily Mail? Because We've heard about how, obviously last year they changed their editor to someone who was quite open about their Remain views. And then,
Yeah.
this on the back of the Daily Express being bought out by the Trinity Mirror Group. And essentially they got a Remain editor as well, who quickly, I noticed, moved back towards a Brexit position when the Daily Express's readers started abandoning them. But really, there's only the Sun and the Telegraph now that are really on that Brexit side. What's going on with the newspapers, and particularly what's going on with the Daily Mail recently with their Cummings headline? I just can't make sense of it.
Well, basically, Geordie Gregg, who's the new editor, comes from a very long line of baronets, and he went to Eton, strangely enough, which makes the fact that he's a Champagne socialist even more remarkable. But he was very much the darling of Lord Rothermere's wife, and when he was given the job of Mail on Sunday editor, they regarded him as being a kinder, gentler version of Paul Dacre. And Paul Dacre, who was one of the most magnificent journalists, one of the greatest editors that this country has ever seen, was kind of summarily dismissed and kicked upstairs. Now, funnily enough, the Mail on Sunday has got a much harder edge politically and is much more in the style of Paul Dacre's Daily Mail than the Daily Mail is now, which has gone very soft and very floppy and very pro-European. And nobody's really sure how that's working. However, they're putting much, much more money into Mail Online. Every newspaper circulation is suffering at the moment. I heard a story the other day, The Guardian is down to something like 60,000 a day in terms of actual newspaper sales, right? Something like 230,000 is what the Express is down to, so all newspapers are suffering because of the fact that it's very difficult at the moment to actually deliver the papers and to get them into shops that people can buy them in. And also, the time of newspapers having the kind of influence that they once had is kind of over for me, because not least because, if you pick up any paper now, aside from some of the features that you might like or the crossword puzzle, there's not an awful lot in that paper in terms of news that you don't already know about.
Yeah. I get quite amused by journalists every day. They tweet out images of front pages that fit their narrative or their arguments. And they say, wow, we're winning the argument. And part of me just thinks, who cares nowadays? Especially we're all in lockdown. Nobody can even get out to buy a newspaper. We're all getting it on our phone in the morning. They are losing relevance. And we can talk about till the sun comes down who's a Remainer and who's a Leaver in terms of newspaper editors. But it's all online. And the thing about online is the readers, they vote with their clicks. They can read whatever they want. So, you're part of the trend, aren't you, by moving talkRADIO onto YouTube?
Oh, very much so. We've now got loads of viewers on YouTube who have not taken away from the number of people that still listen to the shows, because the viewing figures are coming up and up and up and up. And we're doing something like, I think 7.3 million views was our last month's count. So we're going to be probably above 10 million next month. We'll probably be above 20 million in 6 months' time. These are massive numbers, right? These generate money. They generate advertising. They reach many, many more people. My Twitter account alone has got 80,000, people following it, right? Which is 20,000 more than the Guardian's papers are selling. So what does that tell you? Obviously not all 80,000 people are looking at the same time, but you know what I mean? The numbers game is now a very different thing. And people now who edit newspapers are also similar to those other stooges that I was talking about. They're establishment figures now. There's no more Kelvin Mackenzies knocking around who are willing to stick two fingers up to the Prime Minister. These are all people who want to spend time with politicians. They want to have soirees, and Sunday dinners with people who are important. Whereas, I joined newspapers and I became a journalist because I wanted to be anti-establishment. I wanted to be against these people. I wanted to stick two fingers up to them and hold them to account properly. I don't want to have dinner with Boris Johnson. I couldn't care less. I'd quite like to have dinner with my kids, and then on Monday, I'll go and tell him what he's doing wrong.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The way that YouTube has exploded. There's some independent YouTubers out there who get twice as many views as Newsnight, and that must really annoy Emily Maitlis. That's happening. They, with all their education and BBC training and stuff. Do you think that's part of their rage at the moment?
Well, yes, no, I think it probably is. I think also when you're working for an organisation which is constantly under attack, which the BBC now is, partly because they brought it on themselves, they are like the kind of the last days of the Roman Empire. You know, they know that it's all going to come to a sticky end. They know that at some point they're going to get a knock on the door and a tap on the shoulders and say, look, sorry, guys, it's all over. You're going to have to find a way to make some real money and get a real job. You know, no more of this kind of mollycoddling of you know, six-figure salaries in the extreme. I mean, if somebody tells me that Stephen Nolan is worth £500,000 a year, you know, I'm going to punch him. I don't know why they pay these people so much money. It's unbelievable.
That is the salaries is a whole other issue. Right.
Yeah.
Quickly, we'll just talk about the different areas of the Brexit negotiations. I mean, are you you have previously, you just said in this conversation you want us to walk away, and you think we should go. Obviously, the major sticking points at the moment are fishing, and there are this so-called level playing field in trade, which basically means that we have to follow whatever new regulations the EU happens to put out in the future, right, which compromises our whole democracy, some would argue. Do you think that the British people, you talk to these people every day on the phone, they call you up. Yeah. Do you think they're engaged in this issue enough? And do you think that coronavirus has slightly overshadowed it? And do you think that maybe if we don't leave with no deal and we do get forced into some halfway house or we follow some EU rules, people will still be engaged enough to rebel, or will they be weary and just want it done? Where do you think the deal is going? And do you think that people will keep fighting for a clean break Brexit?
Well, what I don't understand is why we would ever be forced into some kind of compromise, because where we are now, it took an awfully long time to get here. We left on the 31st of January, which everybody said couldn't be done. You know, Boris went back to Brussels and got some kind of an agreement from them, which everybody said couldn't be done. You know, of course, there's no reason to have a rancorous exit if you can have an exit which is done with all parties being happy. But if they're going to start holding things over us, and if they're going to start saying, we must do this and we must do that, then that is not, for me, the right spirit for them to be negotiating with. And what they should be doing is looking for a way to make us happy so that we leave with a view to helping them in the future. But if they become adversarial and they do the old Michel Barnier two-step and they start making little asides, and Eva Hofstadt, you know, starts slagging off Dominic Cummings and, you know, trying to jump on another Brexit bandwagon, I think the people who voted for Brexit will just say, do you know what? Let's just bail. Let's just get out. What's the point of sitting there around a table, being insulted, being treated like some kind of spectre at the feast, and being told that you can't have what you want? When we can have what we want, we don't really need permission at the end of the day. And I think while COVID may have kind of distracted a few people at the beginning, I get the sense now that more and more people are wanting a return to a bit of normality. They want to go back to work. They want to get back on the bus. They want to get back on the train. They want to get back on the plane. They want to go on holiday. You know, once we start to move out of this situation that we're currently in lockdown-wise, I think people will turn once again to Brexit, but they will say to Boris Johnson, the government, just get out, just leave. You know, if they're not willing to be nice to us, we don't need to be nice to them. It's that simple.
Okay. Well, we can hope. Quickly, don't frown too much when I mention this. I do just want to quickly talk about Labour. Keir Starmer did say something very interesting the other day. He said that the Brexit debate is over on a podcast with Christopher Hope at the Telegraph. Do you believe him? And do you think that Labour have any future unless they can sort of put the Brexit issue behind them? You used to edit a left-wing newspaper with a lot of Labour readers, so hopefully you'd know a thing or two about this.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I used to mix with quite a lot of Labour people, both in the UK as a whole, but also as editor of the Welsh Mirror, very much with the Welsh lot, and very much also in Scotland as well. But that was before Labour lost Scotland. You know, I'm old enough to remember when Labour used to run Scotland. Yeah. Before they lost it, they became so complacent. I think they've lost the north of England now, and in the same way as they can't get Scotland back, they won't get the north of England back. I think Keir Starmer is a dope. I don't think he's in any way forensic or clever, the way that people describe him as. It's amazing in this country how, if you put the letters QC after your name, or the word sir in front of it, somehow people treat you with more respect than if you haven't got either of those things. I'm not impressed at all with Keir Starmer. I think he's boring. I think he's dull. I think he's without imagination. And I also, don't forget, this is the guy who constructed Labour's brilliant, you know, Brexit strategy at the election, which was, if you voted to leave the European Union, we're behind you. We back that in the constituencies where you did that. But when you voted remain in other constituencies, we also back that. You know, I mean, this is why they got slaughtered and got the worst result since 1935 in the history
Yeah.
of the Labour Party. I don't think the party's got anything to bring to the table. I'm glad to say that they're not as horrible and as anti-Semitic and as left-wing as they once were under Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a bit of sheep's clothing, to be honest, and I don't think they've got much to offer anyone. I mean, the idea that sometimes Keir Starmer says, "Oh, well, of course, we should have a government of national unity." Well, the only people who want a government of national unity are the people who can't win an election, and they can't win an election.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I thought we'd heard the end of that national unity government. Quite a while. That was an odd idea, wasn't it? So the future of the EU and the future of the UK will end quickly by asking you, what do you think will happen to the EU within a year's time? Are they going to face another financial crash? Did we jump from a sinking ship? Or are they going to flourish? And then, do you think we'll get the no deal, or at least a decent deal that you've spoken about so well just earlier?
I think we'll get a decent deal because I think, like I said, people would prefer to get a deal which people agree on, because there's no point in rowing if you don't need to. But I think we should always have the option to leave without one if we're not happy. I think the European Union is indeed a sinking ship. I think that they are going to find it very, very difficult to sustain the amount of expenditure they use just for running Strasbourg and Brussels, because from what I'm told by the people that I've met through guys like yourself and Brexit Party MEPs, I mean, it's absolutely prodigious, the waste of money that goes on in these places. They're going to have no contributions coming from the countries that have been ravaged by COVID-19, which includes Germany, by the way. And in fact, they are going to be in a much worse place a year from now, because don't forget, we as the UK are the biggest single contributor to their budget. They're not going to have our money. Now, I know we may have to give them some money over time, but that will run out, and they will really find themselves, I think, in trouble over the course of the next 3 to 5 years if they last that long.
Yeah, and they can't do what any independent sovereign nation can, which is, you know, to their central bank to loan and to you know, debase the currency or whatever they need to do. They're all tied in, and Germany ends up funding the debt. Anyway, we could talk about their problems all day,
Yes.
but we're coming up to the program limit. But it's been really good having you on, Mike. It's great to get that media perspective. The media have been really a big talking point the last couple of weeks, and I think that we're not about to hear the last from the media with this deadline coming up. There'll be a bit of rage. So do check out Mike. His show starts at 10 a.m. every day. It's on YouTube. It's on DAB, digital radio. You can hear him there. And do give Brexit Watch a follow. It's Brexit Watch 5 on Twitter, and Brexit-Watch is the website. Thank you very much for tuning into the broadcast. See you later, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you.